Ephesians, I think it's chapter 2, where it talks about we are the workmanship of God. And what the term they use for workmanship there is like poetry or art. You know, it's not, you know, like God is in the carpentry shop making this tool, but he's actually working on a piece of art, on a work of art, on a masterpiece. And that is you, that is me. You know, that's how we're represented as, you know, as workmanship, as God's creative process. Yeah.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Capture the Thought. I'd like to start by thanking you all for listening and supporting. It is much appreciated. As we continue with the theme of knowing your identity, knowing your purpose, today we're joined by Musekiwa Samuriwo, who's into business development and strategy, and who is the consummate storyteller. He has developed stories for different media. He is also an author, and I've actually had the pleasure of reading some of his books. Welcome, Seki, to the show. We are very excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, definitely.
So we know that you're always up to something. So what has been keeping you busy lately?
Interesting question. So I've been I've been working on a series called Lasagna Rises. It's an animation project, so that's been on the boil for the last few months, probably last 3. But in between that, I've been trying to write my own, my next book.
Exciting.
That's been slow, but it's been good. Making good progress, actually, working out what the book is about. So it's called Contrarian Shifts.
That sounds deep.
But premised on Romans 12. Romans 12, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 through to 2. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the whole idea of conformity versus transformation. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We can't wait for that book to come out.
Yeah.
Best believe I'll be the first person to buy it.
You better.
I will be. So tell us more about yourself and your background.
Yeah.
About your relationship with God, about how that has developed over the years.
Cool. So I was born into a family of 5 children. I'm the last born. I always say I'm the child of the old age. So my mom was 39, I think, when she had me. So I was born into a family of 5, generally a Christian family. Even my dad at some point. I think he grappled with his faith and racism at some point, but hopefully he worked it out. I guess not necessarily that he worked it out, but God worked in him or worked it out in him. Got born again in my teens, so that's a long time ago. But really it was a result, at the time, I think what was most fascinating when I look back is how, having lost my dad, how God replaced, and came in to cover that gap. So I got born again, and I heard years later about this thing called the Father Heart of God, but I remember saying to one of our leaders that I've been going through it most of my Christian walk because God needed to fill that gap. Otherwise, I'd have gone crazy. So, because I had to grapple with the loss of my dad, I had to grieve, and I didn't know how to. And so, in that process, I also discovered that I enjoyed writing. And I started with poetry, which was more of a cathartic process where I used poetry as a means to heal and express feeling, and also to uncover inspiration. So, I've been a Christian for a while, and I think just the journey has been, I think what I like thinking about when I think of my Christian faith is how the revelation of Jesus is changing for me every time. So it's not necessarily that I'm, sometimes people say, are you growing? And I think to myself, I don't know if I can measure that. But what I can appreciate is that I have a growing view of Christ. And so that, for me, makes the difference. If someone says my prayer life has gone up 100%, I don't know. But what I do know is that I get a clearer revelation and appreciation of Christ, which is so good to have that. I treasure that more. Yeah.
That's a very beautiful thing. And the fact that you were able to recognize God as your father from such a young age. A lot of people who don't grow up with their father struggle with that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to hear that it just came into, I mean, I'm sure it must have been a process, but that's how you view him. So can you tell me how God has been revealing his purpose to you and, allowing you to work through it?
So interesting question. I think I had a good conversation with Kevin. People don't know Kevin, but I think you know Kevin. So we had a good conversation around discovering purpose and then living it out. And I think he started speaking to me years ago, in my 20s. He just started sharing stuff. He even gave me, I have a scripture and a clear vision as to what he would want me to do. And for a number of years, I went out trying to fulfill it. And in those years, I learned the hard way the importance of receiving revelation, incubating it and processing it, and then letting it unravel and unfold naturally.
Wow.
So it's not often the case that you just go out and you do it, but you grow. In many respects, you grow into it. There's a quote, I say something in my book, How to Own Your Car, that purpose is not necessarily something that you discover, but it's something that you walk in. So your daily journey sort of translates to some form of purpose. So you can discover it, but more than anything, it's really walking out the journey. And so God's help has been to mature me, to actually help me realize that it's a progressive thing, and it's one that you walk through in obedience. Even though you sometimes end up walking through the valley of the shadow of death by choice, his rod and his staff, they bring you comfort. So I have had valley moments, dark moments where you feel like you're on a tangent. But in those moments, again, just the reality of Psalm 23 is so helpful, where it says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Thy rod and thy staff, or your rod and your staff, they bring me comfort. Yeah.
That's good. And you mentioned dark moments. Could you possibly give us an example of some? I know as a creative, creators generally face self-doubt and all of that, and just managing to build a career in itself in the creative arts is quite difficult. I mean, those are some of the challenges that I know. And has this been the same for you?
Definitely. I mean, I've moments like where I had a film project and we needed to raise a lot of money. And at the time, we only raised a portion of it. And so that project died a painful death, and my pursuit of film, that was around 2010, my pursuit of a filmmaking career sort of died with that project at some point, and gradually started coming back, or God started reviving things. But I think that project, when I think of Cup of Glory, I think of one of my highest and lowest points at the same time, where I had a project that had international appeal, but I couldn't raise sufficient funding. I only raised about 25%, and then I lost that 25%, that funding. And I remember then, this is the weird thing with God, is then someone had been encouraging me to leave Zim. So for the last 4 years, the 4 years prior, there was just this constant encouragement that, look, if you really want to pursue your career and your talent, you can't do it in Zim. And then he proved his point when that funding died, when I lost that funding because I was based in Zim. So he proved his point, and I remember calling him and saying, hey, look, I need your help. And he's like, well, look, I told you, I could have facilitated your departure from Zim. But you felt you needed with Zim, and I felt God wanted me in Zim at the time. So giving up a project and seeing it die was really a dark moment, because then I kept questioning God that, look, you called me back here. I'm here now, and my career is dying. And then it died, and you're like, look, dude, you haven't really given me what I asked for. And so that was quite a dark moment. It took me a number of years to recover.
Oh.
Yeah. It took me quite a while to get back. I know there were guys who had a few projects they wanted me to write in, and I wasn't so keen to start with because I was like, listen, I've been here before. I've been disappointed before, like really disappointed. So I don't think I'm ready to come back. But gradually I've been coming back, and as you know now, I'm working on an animation project. So that's interesting. That's almost like I was saying to someone, it's coming. Feels like coming full circle. Yeah.
That's interesting. I understand that time was a factor in you getting over that disappointment. Was there anything else? I know lots of people face disappointment, and it's really hard to believe that God is for you in those moments.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Besides the fact that it took you some time off, was there anything else that's helped you get over that?
Yeah, very good question. So yes, on one hand, it's God's word to me, where and this is the hardest thing in life, actually, submitting to a promise where you don't actually have a clear date that like clarity on when it's going to be fulfilled. So I think at the time, God then just said, "Listen, you'll do this stuff again." But with no date, and I was like, cool. And so that was one other factor that contributed to the healing process was, listen, I'm still submitted to God. I still live under His cover or under His wing, and so I'm fine. And then the other thing was my writing expression evolved. I started writing books. So at the time I was writing a book called The God Idea. And so God started unraveling certain ideas from the Bible. And so maybe it was a good distraction from the disappointment. But what it did is it just opened my eyes to a whole other aspect of my writing, which I spent, I think, the last 10 years working on as well. So from take it or leave it, from around 2010, 2011, all the way through to now, I've been writing books. So it's been good to see that expression, and just how someone's writing can change. And so I think partly what God did was help me realize, that you can change, you can adapt your writing to particular, genres. And in that time, I remember He said to me, "You're more than just a writer." And so that sort of helped me unravel so much more as well. So I then, people say I do a lot of things, but one of the things I say to myself, and I have a conversation with God, is, look, I'm trying to express as much of who I am as possible in the time I'm given. So if I'm more than just a writer, then there must be more. And I just need to discover what that is and express it. And use the time that I have to try and do that.
That's beautiful. Trusting in God's promise is not exactly.
No, it's not easy.
It's not exactly easy.
Yeah.
So, and you don't just do the writing. You're also in business development, I believe.
Yeah.
And so, is there one side that you lean towards the most, and how has it been, balancing those commitments?
So that's a good question. So I've been saying to friends these days that balancing is an interesting word. I mean, both are synonymous. So balancing and harmony are two words that at some point seem synonymous, and we could say from an English perspective are synonymous. But what I found is balancing sort of implies you have to shave off from one side to add to another to create balance. Like if you look at it from a technical viewpoint, like accounting or like scales, you're adding weight to one side so that you can balance it out. But what I found in my conversations with God is that harmony is such an interesting word, because it's like we've got all these different sounds. When you think of harmony, all these different sounds, and it's not a matter of shaving off one to allow another to become more prominent, but it's playing each one at the right time to create the song. So treating your life like a song makes it a bit different, or like an orchestra, where it's like business could be the wind instruments, writing could be the percussion. it's not a matter of just shutting down the percussion, but hey, this is the time for percussion, so play percussion. So maybe then treating God as the conductor in my life, and he's now just saying we're gonna create a song called Musekiwa, and that song involves different sides of me expressed at different times. It doesn't mean I've lost the other side. It just means that at this time, this is the part of the song that's playing, and we're creating this music together. Wow. So that changes, and in the process of doing that, it's been like 2 years of working this out. Is in those 2 years now realizing what that means. That sometimes, like right now, I haven't written. I started rewriting the book Contrarian Shifts a few weeks back, but I hadn't touched it for like 3 months. But I'm not feeling as bleak as I used to, because I'm now thinking, oh yes, it's music. Let's make music together with God. And so in that process, this is the time is going to come where God then conducts me towards the book. And in that process, I'll discover new things and fresher things and allow it to come forth.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Life is a song. That has definitely shifted my perspective. I used to think that balancing was just an act, and sometimes one side is heavier than the other, and the other side is lighter than the other. Yeah. So it's interesting to view this as all part of the song that is your life.
Exactly, and it's a beautiful song.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Ephesians. I think it's chapter 2 where it talks about we are the workmanship of God, and what. The term they use for workmanship there is like poetry or art. It's not, like God is in the carpentry shop making this tool, but he's actually working on a piece of art, on a work of art, on a masterpiece. And that is you, that is me. That's how we're represented as workmanship, as God's creative process. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And talking about works of arts and workmanship, do you have a creative inspiration? Is there someone or something even that inspires you creatively?
So on one hand, I draw inspiration from a lot of places. Of course, it sounds cliche that God, I get inspired by God, but genuinely I do. He does give me ideas, and sometimes I dream stuff. So that I know. So what I'm trying to remember his name. Napoleon Hill talks about creative imagination, and I think that's where you find God's inspiration comes in, where it's almost serendipitous. It's like an idea from nowhere. I wake up one morning and I've got this idea. So I know there's that side. Then on the other side, I have what you call synthetic imagination, where it's related to how I interact with people. So, for instance, my business partner, we do work together, but sometimes we make conversation in the middle of that. And in that conversation, we're exploring different themes. So he's contributed to, inspirationally, he's contributed to a number of books I've written. Say like The Shark and the Japanese Fisherman was a conversation we were having in the office, and I was like, oh, that's a book. And that's happened before. And sometimes people like James Allen, I'm reading other books, and I find what happens is I discover something in that book that could be inspirational. And I also watch movies a lot. So I draw inspiration from different things, a lot of reading, a lot of watching. And when I do, say, for example, I've watched Lord of the Rings more than 20 times. Both the short version and the extended version.
Wow, and each time,
but each time I watch it is really, I've read the book 3 times, is to appreciate just how someone draws and takes what could be a concept, a basic concept, and unravels it into this masterpiece. And so I watch it to appreciate that.
It's beautiful. A lot of young Christian creatives grapple with the balance, maybe I can call it the balance of, honoring God with their work and also wanting to tell a story. And sometimes those can be two opposing things. They shouldn't be, but they can be. And so is it possible for them to create art that honors God without necessarily it being Christian, without having it to without having a Bible verse in it, without having the word God or Jesus in it. What's your perspective on that?
So that's a good question. On one level, there's you don't want it to be like a. I think the danger is that you put your faith on one side and then you put your creative work on another side. I had to go through a struggle where, that was my struggle originally, until in a conversation with God, God said, "Listen, you're a Christian who writes, and I want you to treat it as that." So I'm a Christian who writes, and sometimes we push for Christian writers to try and push Christian themes. Rather, what this journey has taught me is that let your Christianity flow through your writing. So let your faith manifest in the way that it does. And so I have instances where I've written a book where it has nothing to do with God. And God's not sitting there thinking, "Look, dude, what have you done?"
Yeah.
But He's been with me on that journey. So I've been writing business books. And as I've gone on that journey, even when I was writing films or screenplays, you start finding places where your faith can be expressed. And then you express your faith in the way you present yourself as well. So you're in the middle of people who are not necessarily believers. And the goal is not to enforce or input your faith to such an extent that you're forcing it in. And the word there will be contrived.
Yes.
But that they see it manifest. I love the word manifest or expressed, because what you're doing is it becomes more natural from the inside out versus trying to think hard about it. So that's on one level. Another level would be to talk about the whole, what's called the secular sacred divide. And going on a journey with God, you'll discover that God finds everything holy. So, it's a passage in Colossians, I think Colossians 3, that says, do all things in speech and in deed as unto the Lord. So everything you do, whether you're an accountant, so I don't know how an accountant infuses their verses in a balance sheet. So that was one of the things I went on a journey with God. It's like, look, it's not fair that Christian writers have to write a verse every time.
Yeah.
Yet the accountant has no responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
They're not forced to write now, when they're balancing the balance sheet and they're writing the income statement, to have a verse, therefore. But a lot of what they're doing is revealed in the way they work. And so breaking that idea, it's actually we call it a heresy, evangelical Gnosticism. It's a big phrase, that you divide the world into secular and sacred. Yet to God, He created all things and it's all sacred to Him. It will all be returned to Him. That's why creation groans for the manifestation of the sons of God, because all will be returned to God, and despite it being corrupted now, all will be restored in some way. Even when we talk about the testing or the destruction through fire, you can interpret it as the earth being refined and a new earth emerging out of the elements. So behold, I saw a new earth. What happened? It was tested by fire. It was shaken, as it says in Hebrews. And what could be shaken was passed on. So a challenge for believers is to create more unshakable ideas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is deep. That's very deep. That's a lot of food for thought.
Yeah.
And so what is, obviously we live by the whole Bible, but is there a verse or a piece of scripture that you hold on to, that you feel like, okay, this is my all season kind of verse?
Yeah. So actually, when I used to write poetry, I used to write it into my books. So this is where I was giving the example that look, I've written poetry about random things, but it's coming from a place of inspiration that God then takes me on this journey to discover myself, to discover the world, whether it's the sadness in the world or the happiness, take your pick. So the verse is Ephesians 3 verse 20. Unto Him who is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. So I like the fact that it talks about imagination and it talks about our ability to conceive, conception and thought. Yeah. So that verse is really inspirational from an artistic viewpoint. There's room to imagine. Yeah, I take it literally, and I like, God, within your power, there's room for me to imagine, and then you'll do much more. Yeah.
Beautiful. And what word of advice would you give to a young creative?
Well, because I guess you're calling me old.
No, I did not say that. I did not say that.
You implied it.
I did not imply it. Do not put words in my mouth. Okay, maybe to someone who is getting their starts. All right, I'm now trying to,
So what I would say is actually go for it. You know what I mean? There's more to writing than just, or more to the creative process than what you think it's about. There are different ways of uncovering and discovering your creative process, and it manifests in different places in your life. So I think being open to let God help you unravel all of that. And I think I was listening to another podcast one time, and they'll talk about the big P and the small p in purpose. So big purpose or big P purpose is how you're going to change the world. Small p purpose is what you do on a day-to-day basis to outwork it or to live it out. So be it writing, be it drawing, do it whenever you get the chance, express it, find the freedom. I think one of the things that, sometimes an inconducive environment, sometimes like Zim, what it does is you equate your expression to money, to monetary value. And sometimes there's some things that I do that have no monetary value. They're priceless in that it's room for me to discover. So the two things that you need to work on: one, just free expression; two, sometimes monetizing some of that expression. Those are two different things. And so learning to uncover and discover those is a great thing. It's a good thing to do. Yeah.
Wow.
So I would just say to guys, if you're drawing, draw. If you're writing, write. If it means you need a day job to keep the lights on, find the day job, work on the day job. But as we learned one time on Saturday, that your working hours in total are 12. So you can give yourself 4 hours in a day to find that free expression and discover more of what you have as a gift. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.
For the words of wisdom and the gems. Thank you for taking the time out to talk to us.
Such a pleasure. I enjoyed it, yeah.
Thank you. So we have reached the end of the episode. And until next time, goodbye.